it's almost like, I don't know if imposter syndrome means you're not confident. I think it just means that you're afraid people are going to find out about your biggest fear.
And so in every arena, you kind of have to understand where's my internal set point versus the external perception. And then how do I align those?
Next Level Nation, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of Next Level University, where we teach you how to level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. We hope you enjoyed our latest episode, number 1193, How Do I Avoid Holiday Guilt as a Dream Chaser? Today, for episode number 1194, Does Imposter Syndrome Ever Go Away? I was on a podcast the other day, Alan, and I mentioned this in passing, and I think in one of the other episodes, but I was the guest for somebody who was a space doctor. Mm-hmm. Her job at NASA was to be the doctor that goes to space. That was literally her job. Now she is a ICU and ER doctor in Texas, a peak performance coach, just amazing, just an amazing human being. And I was on the interview with her, and we were talking about self-awareness. And I said, a good example of self-awareness is me understanding that just because I am intimidated by you in this situation does not make you a bad person. It's probably more about me than it is about you, especially since you're such a sweet, awesome human being. But the reason we're doing this episode, Does Imposter Syndrome Ever Go Away? I don't know that it ever really, really goes away. I think you just become more friendly with it. I went on another show the same week. Tough week for the kid. And it was with a psychologist. And he was a very, very cool person. But we were talking about education. He said, I think if you total up all of my degrees, I have like 6 or something. And I was like, oh, nice. I have zero degrees. Whatever the temperature is, that's how many degrees I have. Yeah. But I had another one of those moments where I was like, imposter syndrome. Like, what am I doing here? Why am I on this show? I don't know what the hell I'm talking about compared to you, right? Like, I had those moments. Now it all comes full circle. So shout out to, I think there's several people on the team doing this, so I don't want to say any names because I don't want to leave anybody out. But 2023 is going to be the push to get Kevin podcast speeches, because Kevin knows a lot about podcasting. Alan knows a lot about podcasting too, but I coach podcasters, and that's really what I've leaned into. I'm going down to Florida in January because there is a potential that I might have a fill-in spot for either a panel, or if a speaker can't make it, maybe I can speak at this event. But I'm already having those moments of, when I get down there, what am I going to feel like? Like, what am I going to feel like in the room with a bunch of other podcasters? What would I feel like seeing somebody up on stage? Would I say, oh, I could do that better? Or am I going to be just stuck in imposter syndrome saying, I can never do that? I don't know what these people know, even though I think I do. So at the end of the day, I don't really think imposter syndrome does go away. I think your reaction to it changes, your relationship with it changes, and I think it's easier to convince yourself you're not. That's what I would say. It still happens for me before I go on certain shows where people are either super successful or multimillionaires, whatever it is. I still have those moments, but they're way less than they used to be. And now I'm very aware of them, so I'm very comfortable with them.
Well, I remember the first millionaire we ever interviewed. Mm-hmm. You were super uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. You know, and he had just sold his practice, and it was like this big building, you know, and he was the owner of that building. And how did you feel then versus now with millionaires? Because now, you know, not only have you interviewed many millionaires at this stage, but you also coach millionaires.
I understand now that everybody's just a human being. That's really what it is for me now. Is like, yes, you have amazing accolades and you're a great human being. You're very intelligent. You're most likely more intelligent than me, right? That's possible. Cool. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that I can't add value. That's it for me. It doesn't mean that I can't add value to your audience, because you might be more intelligent, but I'm more seasoned at this. 99.9 times out of 100, I'm going to be the person who's done this more. So that really gives me a level of confidence. And again, I think maybe for me, that's a little bit of I don't want to say training wheels because I don't use it that way, but at least when I'm being interviewed because of what we've built. So it does give me a little extra confidence that, I mean, you've researched me. You kind of know what I talk about. You kind of have an expectation of what's going to happen here. It's my goal to exceed that expectation.
What was it like before? When we went to interview that millionaire?
I think I was just so afraid to get found out. I was just so afraid that the person was going to realize I wasn't. I think imposter syndrome is everybody finding out. So your fear that everybody finds out your biggest fear. Yeah. So the fear that everybody finds out that whatever it is that I'm still nervous before interviews. Like, I think that's my fear. The fear is that you'll find out that I'm nervous, even though I'm supposed to be the person who's never nervous before interviews. That. It's almost like, I don't know if imposter syndrome means you're not confident. I think it just means that you're afraid people are going to find out about your biggest fear. They're going to call you out for it. It's going to be revealed, and then it's going to be a conversation of, what does that mean for me? What does that mean in this situation? But it's drastically different than it used to be. It used to be, I don't belong here. Now it's, maybe I am not exactly like this person, but there is some value for me to add. I'd say that's probably the best way to explain it for me is, I'm very confident in my ability as a podcaster. I feel really good about that. I feel really, really, really good about that. But it's just the reps. It's just the reps.
When Kev told me we were going to do this episode, the imposter syndrome, when you said that, does imposter syndrome ever really go away? I tried to filter it through my own experience. And the only thing I could come up with really was it never goes away if you keep growing. I do think it goes away if you stay on the same level. Like, for example, if you weren't growing exponentially, not only as a person and as a business owner, you probably wouldn't be interviewed by a doctor from NASA. Mm. So, like, I think a lot of people actually, when they feel imposter syndrome, they use that as the red light to go back to an old level. Versus the green light of, I actually need to figure out a way to belong here by working on my skills, by putting in the reps, by putting in the work. So, for example, your bodybuilding show. Mm. Before you did a bodybuilding show, you felt like an imposter. After you won the show and you were going to go do your next show, you didn't feel like an imposter anymore, right? Not as much. Right. And so I think, but that's why you start with novice and then amateur and then pro, because eventually you kind of win at that level enough times to where that goes away and your capabilities and your awareness are beyond that level. Do you know the interesting thing? I think this is really what imposter syndrome is. And again, I do think it's what I said originally, but I was listening to a book the other day, and this really made sense to me. When your internal and your external status aren't aligned. Yeah. That is imposter syndrome in a nutshell. And if you don't have accurate self-awareness of who you are, I think you're always going to have it. Even if you stop growing. Because you and I know people who so externally, their status is a 10 out of 10. Everybody looks at them as, and I don't mean this in any negative way, quote unquote, way better than they actually are. Yeah. Where internally they don't feel good enough. And that difference is, it gets them stuck. They're living with imposter syndrome because they're not who everybody else thinks they are. Right. Even though that's not necessarily what they intended. There's something called the law of unintended consequences, right? It's almost like, what's a good example? Let's say you go to the gym because you want to get in shape and then you realize your elbow is hurting you. It's like you didn't intend on going to the gym for the purpose of having a hurt elbow, but that's what ended up happening. So with imposter syndrome, it's almost like, okay, I did this podcast or whatever, and I did this YouTube channel and it blew up. And now I'm seen as this expert that my internal growth didn't have time to catch up to. And we know some people like that, honestly, where their results on the outside world and the way the world perceives them is genuinely, from my perspective, way inflated based on in comparison to the truth. And I'm just going to keep this anonymous, but I'll use an example. We have one woman who's a friend of ours who I think is an awesome human being, but she's on this massive pedestal on social media that she also has kind of put herself on. But like, she's way less than people think in terms of her actual understanding of the things she talks about. Genuinely. It's just she hasn't put in the reps nearly as much as what people think. I also think there's people that are the opposite. And I think that some people are the opposite. In other words, they're perceived here and they're actually incredible. I have one person on the NLU team I'm thinking of who is way more than people think. Way more than people think. Like, I can't wait for her to show the world what she really is. And I think it comes down to that framework. I forget what we called it, but it's essentially there's a left side and a right side. The left side is, it's called the growth circles, but it really should be called the imposter circles. So picture on the left side, there's a target with 3 layers. The inner part is capabilities. Then the next layer is awareness, and then the next layer is results. When your results are far bigger than your awareness and your capabilities, that's imposter cycle. That's the imposter circles. In other words, you don't know how you got here. You know, because you didn't necessarily intend on it. Law of unintended consequences. Okay, that woman I talked about earlier, I think she's there, and I honestly think she's stuck because she's kind of having to not get found out now. Because it would take, honestly, in my opinion, it would take at least 5 years of deep study behind the scenes for her to even come close to the way people see her.
Hey guys, so I wanted to give a little bit of my experience about group coaching. I'm learning stuff, I'm applying the habits, and I have other people that's doing the same exact thing. One of the biggest things that I think I gained from group coaching is when I went through that month of being so sick, I was so determined that I would just try to do as much as I could. And I just couldn't wait until I felt good enough to get back to doing all of them. I've just seen so much growth in myself, and I'm so appreciative to have the group, to have, that immersive experience. And I really appreciate all that y'all do.
Well, it's so hard to start over.
I know.
I've seen that so many times with podcast clients who are super successful. And it's like, I understand you're successful in real life, but this is podcast land. You're starting over.
Yeah,
you're starting over. You're building an entirely new brand. Like, you're going to go back to the beginning.
I know.
You're going back to because you're not, if you're, say, who's somebody, Taylor Swift came to me. She's like, I want to start a podcast. Yeah, you're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. That's easy. Don't worry about that. Literally, that would be the easiest thing in the world. But if you're somebody who, say you're a successful business owner that is just running a business, you're making $1 million a year, nobody knows about you, you're starting over. And I think
not fully over, but you're starting
fair.
Yeah,
because
the
you
person
have
with the $1 million
resources.
business obviously has resources. Yeah. So, but
resources.
In terms of the imposter syndrome, you are kind of starting over
to a degree
because you're perceived up here as this doctor or this lawyer or this engineer or whatever. And I remember having that. I was very, very, very successful in my mid-20s, and then when we went back all the way back, I remember being like, I am way more than people think. I don't understand. And again, in hindsight, it makes sense. What is that? We had a cartoon avatar.
What is that? What's the frame for that? If the opposite of that is imposter, what's that?
That's why I asked you questions on this episode, is because I don't feel like I have a ton of imposter syndrome. I feel like in many ways I have the opposite, which makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm actually a lot more capable than people think.
What's the opposite of an imposter? Imposter is when you're faking it.
I think it's Clark Kent and Superman. I think the imposter... Okay, Superman with a bunch of superheroes, he belongs.
Yeah.
Superman in the real world has to pretend to be Clark Kent because he's too scary for other people if he actually showed his true strength. And so some people, I think, in some arenas, I'm kind of Clark Kent. I'm an imposter. I kind of own it. I don't really have a problem with that. Like I always talk about gardening or cars or whatever. Like I don't even know how to fix, like our power went off this morning. I don't know why. Like, is it a circuit breaker? Like, I don't know. Yeah. So I don't care. I'm just like, I think the power's out. You know, my deductive reasoning tells me.
Alan's sitting in the closet with a flashlight reading a book.
I literally prepped for a book club. You know how it is.
It's all fine.
But when it comes to like intellectual pursuits of business or whatever, I'm not an imposter. I'm the other way. I'm actually way more than what people could possibly perceive, in my opinion. Again, genuinely, that's what I believe to be true. So as a coach, I'm way more than people think. That's why I'm not paid as much as a Tony Robbins, because I might be as good of a coach as Tony Robbins, but no one knows that yet. So I have to kind of, and again, he has 40 years on me. So I get it, right? Not 40, but at least 30. And so technically he has 26 years on me, but the opposite of imposter syndrome is that. And so in every arena, you kind of have to understand where's my internal set point versus the external perception. And then how do I align those? On the NLU team, we hire from within the community, and we always will, because it's just more aligned. But I've had team members come to me and say, this is like way more than I thought. I mean, you know, we from the outside, we look like a podcast, and, you know, we look like a couple guys who podcast, really. And when you get underneath the surface here, and you see the rest of the iceberg underneath the surface, it's way bigger than I think what people can fathom. And that's okay. And eventually that will all surface, and eventually everyone will be able to see all that. But there's a lot more going on behind the scenes here than anyone can really perceive yet. And I think that's the analogy, the iceberg analogy. I know one person appears to have a big iceberg out above the surface, and underneath the water, there's very little ice. That's the first person I was talking about. But no one really knows that unless they have kind of dug deep in that arena, so to speak. So business, for example, this woman from the outside, people think knows a lot about business. I know that she doesn't, and that's okay. All right, so there's very little ice underneath the water there. So she probably feels like an imposter all the time when it comes to the business side. Now flip that script. There's someone on the NLU team anonymously who is a way bigger iceberg beneath the surface. Like, as a matter of fact, and I think this is the opposite of imposter syndrome in a way, she actually hides the bigger iceberg because she's afraid not to belong. She actually pretends to be worse than she really is, so she fits in. And when she's with me, she says, like, she feels the most aligned. I know why. Because I actually give you the permission to be as great as you really are. You're not afraid not to belong here. And so hopefully everyone out there watching or listening to this resonates of like, which you're either going to have imposter syndrome one way or the other. Either you're going to feel like you're too good for the room or too not good enough for the room. And both of them are, the way you react to those is very, very important. This is why we have the puffer fish and the turtle shell, and this is why we have the drive to 5. If I'm way ahead of the room, Kevin and I went to an event once. I know we got to go. We went to an event once where I told him after the event, I said, honestly, it was hard for me to learn from those people because in many ways my understanding is at a deeper level. And so I had to pull Kevin out of the room and say, like, don't take advice from them. We're doing something bigger and different, and they don't know that, and that's okay. And then I remember when I thought I was a great speaker, and then I saw Brendan Burchard, and this is when I was, I don't know, 29 maybe. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not good at all. Brendan Burchard is way ahead of me, like unbelievably ahead of me. And then we started the live podcast, which was every single week a keynote for 136 weeks or 132 weeks or whatever. And now I feel the opposite when we went to that other event. So it really is either your truth is above or below the perception, and that's when things get messed up if you're not careful. Because if you're more than people think, you'll turtle shell to fit in. If you're less than people think, you'll puffer fish to fit in. And either way, you're not being authentic, and neither one is super useful. I think what is useful is if you're better than people think, just own it and try to shine and be a guide, but don't do it with ego. And if you're worse than people think, just be vulnerable. Just be vulnerable and be a student. That's okay.
the opposite of imposter syndrome is the Dunning-Kruger effect. So maybe basically vastly overestimating your potential. So an amateur chess player thinking that they could compete with the best of the best. So I guess, and in this moment,
But that's not what I was describing regarding someone who. Oh, okay.
No. Yeah. But I literally asked the question: what's the opposite of imposter
That's
syndrome?
the people at the high end of Drive to 5.
So I'm realizing you almost don't ever want to be on either of the polarities.
Yeah.
I couldn't even say the word polarities. You kind of want to be the balance of the synchronization of the two, as Alan would say.
You always want to be
centeredness.
accurate in your thinking of self.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's what we try to help people with.
Yes. Last thing before we go, because I know we are coming up against it. I think I'm realizing one of the reasons. So when I go on a podcast and it's just, I'm getting introduced as who I am based on what we've done. Awesome. I feel really good. If you put me against a podcaster, I feel really good. I get very little imposter syndrome. I know we're awesome. Again, yes, we are. We're awesome, and we have a great business, and we're strong speakers and effective communicators. You might not think that listening to this show, but if you went back and listened to a previous episode, you would see the difference. And if you go listen to another episode from another show, maybe you'll recognize a difference, right? So if you're used to listening to us, then you might not recognize it. But when I take the stage in front of 1,000 other podcasters, that's when I'll have imposter syndrome, I think. Because it's almost like I'm infiltrating a new society that I haven't really been in. That.
You're ready, man.
I know,
totally ready.
I know I am logically.
Okay.
I know I am logically. And Alan and I had this talk where it's going to cost probably $1,500 total for me to go to Florida. And when we first talked about it, I said, honestly, I don't think it's worth it, man. I'm going to lose 4 days because these events are all day. I'm not going to be able to do anything during the day. It's not like I'm going to be doing coaching calls. $1,500, we just spent a bunch of money on traveling. I don't think I should do it. Then we started reaching out to places, and Amy reached out to this festival and said, Kevin would like to speak if you have any availabilities. And I started talking to the speaker liaison, and she said, are you planning on coming down? Because if so, I can put you on the list for fill-ins. And it's like, all right, maybe I should do it. And then it's the even deeper part of, it'll be really good for me to go there and figure out how I actually feel. Like when I'm sitting in the audience, one of three things is going to happen. I'm going to say, oh my goodness, I know more than everybody here. I know everything. Like, this is not valuable to me, not to everybody else, to me.
That's what's going to happen.
It could be the other side where I say, oh my goodness, I am in over my head and we are Jeff. Or it could be somewhere in the middle of, okay, this is valuable. There are some things, and I think this is what it's going to be. There are some things that I don't know nearly as well because I haven't been focusing on. That's going to happen. I'm certain of that. I'd bet money on it. There's certain things like search engine optimization. I haven't done a lot of research on.
Yeah.
No, not when it comes to like,
yeah.
I feel really good about this.
I see you. Yeah.
Yeah. There are certain things.
You'll be more on the end of I'm ahead of the game than I thought.
Most
remember
likely.
at Brendan Burchard when we did the clarity thing we realized that we have a lot more clarity than most people?
Yeah.
It's that. And again, that when you're putting in the work behind the scenes, you'll end up on that end because a lot of people aren't. That's, how many people in that room are going to have more episodes than us?
Well, I don't know because I'm so used to comparing to the statistical norm. You got to think that's a subset of a subset. If you're going to go to an event, you're a pretty serious podcaster, probably. That's my thought. But again, my goal.
I can't wait.
My goal is
always like, oh my
too.
God, you're gonna come back with an ego. I'm so excited.
No.
I know. I'm joking.
I got to be careful though. I rented a nice Airbnb and a nice car. I kept it in the budget, I promise. But when I'm doing something like that, it's very important for me to emotionalize the experience.
I had imposter syndrome when we got a housekeeper. Because I grew up with very little and we always had to struggle with money, and now it's not like we don't still have money challenges. It's just very different now. It's very different. But it wasn't a negative thing. It was just weird. It's like a weird feeling like, wait a minute, I have like nice clothes and a housekeeper and
well, that's a good reframe, I think.
It's the best. Yeah, it's great. I'm really grateful.
But I mean, just in general, the the imposter syndrome popping up is not a negative necessarily. You just got to explore. Like, what does it mean? Some of us should have imposter syndrome. When we interviewed a Muay Thai champion, and then he asked if I wanted to hit mitts. And so all that means is he holds the mitts and he says like 1, 1, 2, jab, jab, straight. And I have the most imposter syndrome.
Of course.
In my friend group, I am the fighter. In this ring, I'm a piss on. This guy could do anything. He knows I'm not legit. He knows I'm not legit. He can tell. You can tell. I'm wearing cargo shorts, hitting the mitts, man. You know, like
you were pretty jacked back then, though. With your shirt off, so you looked good. Yeah.
Yeah,
you made it look right. Yeah,
I'm bulking. I'm bulking now. All right, we're gonna go. Next level nation. If you want to start off 2023 properly, with momentum, with clarity, with focus, with opportunity, please join our group coaching. We are at least halfway filled up already, so get your spot while you can. What is it, Alan? With the 30% discount, does it come to less than $50 a month?
Yeah, less than $50 a month. I think it's $48.50.
So
we have half the group filled as of right now.
You probably spend, and again, I don't know you personally, but you probably spend that on streaming platforms. If you have Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, and YouTube Red, you're spending 40 or $50 a month. You could spend that towards your future. That's all I'll say.
Mm-hmm. The best investment you can make is in yourself. You know, even financial investors say there's nowhere else you can get a better return. If you invest in you, you'll eventually earn more money. One of the 6 sessions is on wealth creation. So there's no possibility. There's no possibility that you're not going to eventually make that money back and then some. So there really is no risk with this. It's the best investment you can make.
Can I share really quickly? I sent this message to the team because I was super pumped.
Yeah, I hope you do.
A young lady reached out to me and she said, so I did a podcast breakthrough session. She listens to this show and Podcast Growth U. Sweetheart, such a sweet human being. And she messaged me and said, hey, I have to tell you something. And I was like, what's up? And she said, my husband, who never, ever, ever, ever understood or believed in the value of coaching, he found your podcast after I told him about it, Next Level U. And he started listening. And then that's the last I heard. She's like, that was the last I heard. I assumed maybe he fell off. And she said, I heard him, I don't know if he was like in the garage or he was doing something. And I heard you and Alan talking. And I went in and he was listening to NLU. And he said he's like, I love these guys. I've been listening to these guys every single day. And then he signed up for group coaching. So somebody who didn't believe in the importance or the value of coaching has now signed up for group coaching. That's awesome. Super excited to meet this person. But I wanted to share that story because, again, maybe now isn't the right time. But maybe now is the right time. For him, it was the right time. Maybe previously it wasn't. Right? So maybe now is the right time. If it is, make sure you take advantage of the momentum that you're already creating by believing it's the right time.
If you're feeling the fear of imposter syndrome, trust me, you're going to fit in here. These are other listeners of this show. You'll probably, and if you do feel imposter syndrome, maybe it's because you're going to level up around people. You know, give it a shot at very least. You know, I think it's a great thing. Okay. So also we have a monthly meetup. This is our 13th one. I'm going to be very quick about it because we're way over time here.
Oh, we're jeffing.
Setting clear goals for 2023 that actually build belief. Kevin and I believe that a lot of people set goals that are either way too high or way too low. They're either too low, they don't excite you, or they're way too high and they're just overwhelming and they just crush your self-esteem and self-belief. So we're going to help you set goals that are clear, concise, and that can actually help you build yourself up rather than tear yourself down. That is January 5th, 2023. Starts at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Be there or be square.
Next Level Nation tomorrow for episode number 1195. Don't lose yourself in the journey. I had a very interesting call with somebody the other day, and we were talking a lot about this. So I figured as a dream chaser, you might come across this at some point. Maybe you already have. Maybe that's what you're dealing with right now. So we will talk about that. As always, we love you, appreciate you, grateful for each and every one of you. And at NLU, we do not have fans. We have family. We will talk to you all tomorrow.
We will see you at the next level.